Perhaps one of the more sought after qualities of a great landscape photo is overall image sharpness and clarity. And this is evident just based off of the cameras and lenses being produced today. Cameras are shipping with higher and higher resolution numbers year after year. Camera lenses are always improving and are able to create sharper and sharper images. So the photographs coming out of today's modern cameras are already reasonably sharp. But you can enhance those details even further by using specific post-processing techniques. But the thing about it is, not all detail is created equal, and nor should it be sharpened that way either. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to sharpening your landscape photos. I mean, within a single image, you could have large-size detail. You could have large to medium-sized detail, medium-sized detail, medium to small-sized detail, or even fine-sized detail. And each level of detail should be handled or enhanced in a slightly different manner. And that's the purpose of this week's video, is to discuss the 5 ways that you can sharpen or enhance the detail in your landscape photos using Lightroom. Now, the funny thing about all this is there's actually no way to sharpen your photograph. There's no way to sharpen individual pixels. It's all merely an illusion. And this illusion is created by applying very small levels of contrast to the edges of your photograph. And this micro contrast or edge contrast that it's commonly referred to as is what creates the illusion that your photograph is actually sharper than it really is. So to jump right into it, the very first way, and this is probably the most commonly used approach to sharpen photographs inside of Lightroom, it's by using the detail panel. And the detail panel is absolutely fantastic at sharpening the smallest, really the small to fine size detail, or the smallest levels of detail within your photograph. So this is an image from my trip along the Oregon coast a couple months ago. This is a fully edited image, and here is the raw file. So here is the fully edited image, and here's the raw file. So I'm going to come up here to the basic panel. Just going to put a real quick edit on here by hitting the auto button. Then I'm going to come down to the detail section. Now the detail section, the sharpening component, is broken down into 4 sliders. You have the amount slider, which indicates the amount of sharpening that you want to apply to your photograph. You have the radius slider, which indicates the number of pixels around an edge that you want to sharpen. You have the detail slider, which indicates the amount of detail within your photograph that you want to sharpen. And then perhaps the most important to me is the actual masking slider, which gives you the ability to determine exactly where you want this sharpening to be applied inside of your photograph. So what I usually will do is zoom all the way in, ideally to an edge an edge of the scene, something like this right here. And I'll come up to the amount slider, and I'm usually somewhere between the mid 50s to the mid 60s, right around about there. And then the radius, I'll usually will maybe go around 0.8, maybe 1.3. I don't really move that a whole lot. It usually just sits right at 1.0. And in the detail, I will usually bring that up somewhere between the mid 60s and mid 70 range. And then the masking slider. So if you hold down the Option on a Mac, or I believe Alt on a PC, and you start to drag the masking slider to the right, and you want to remember that black conceals and white reveals. So anything that is in white is going to receive the sharpening, and anything that is in black is not going to receive the sharpening. And you'll notice as I continue to slide the masking slider to the right, the areas of black become greater and the areas of white are drastically reduced. So if I bring this all the way to 100, you can only see the most distinct edges really of the photograph are going to receive the sharpening. If I leave this at 0, you'll notice that everything is white. That means everything will receive the sharpening. But if I just start to slowly move this over a little bit, I don't want a lot of the sky to receive the sharpening, and I don't want a ton of the water to receive it either. So something right about there looks good. Now, if I zoom all the way back into this edge, and if I toggle the effect on and off, this is off, and this is on. This is off, and this is on. And if I really crank it up, you'll really be able to see the difference. Off and on. Now, you would never really want to do this, but I wanted to show you one of the drawbacks of using the detail panel. And each way to enhance detail in your photos in Lightroom, they have pluses and minuses. So each one has a drawback if you use that type of approach a little bit too heavy-handed. And for the detail slider here, or in the detail panel, the amount slider, you'll get halos around edges, and you can really see this on a very distinct edge, and that is what you want to look out for. If you see a halo, you have applied way too much sharpening. You really want to start to back that off. And I would recommend backing it off until that halo completely disappears. So somewhere about right there looks good. And I'll toggle this on and off one more time. So that's off, and that is on. So it's very subtle, but the detail panel is a fantastic way to sharpen this small or to find a small size detail within your landscape photos. Now the second way is by using the texture slider. Now the texture slider is fantastic at sharpening those really small to medium sized detail. So here's another image from my trip along the Oregon coast. This once again is a final image, and here is the raw image straight out of camera. So this is the fully edited version, and this is the raw version. So I'm going to close this down. I'm going to come back to the basic panel again. I'm going to hit auto for that quick edit. And then I'm going to come down here to the texture slider. So if I zoom all the way in here, there's a lot of this isn't considered really super fine size detail, and it's not really considered large size detail either. This is really small to medium size detail, which is what the texture slider is great for. And I always just kind of slide it back and forth just to really see what it's doing. And as you can see, it's a very subtle difference, but for this, you don't want to get too carried away, but I would say somewhere maybe about right there looks good. And if I turn it on and off, that's off, on, off, and on. So it's a very, very subtle difference, but it'll definitely enhance the smallest level of detail within your overall photograph. And sometimes it's easier if you zoom all the way out. So there it is with texture, there it is without. I'm going to crank it all the way to 100 so you can really see. And something that you might notice is that when you do this, it adds a little bit of luminance to the overall photograph. And that's what you want to look out for. If you see a ton of luminance, or if you see areas of small to medium sized detail becoming drastically brighter, then you might have added too much texture to that area. You might want to back that off a little bit. But for this, I'm usually somewhere maybe around 10 to 20, sometimes a little bit more. It really just depends on the individual scene, but I really do like using the texture slider for that small to medium sized detail. Now, the third approach is by using the clarity slider. And this is also a very, very popular approach, but this is probably the slider that has the greatest impact and also the greatest negative impact if you apply too much. And it is fantastic for sharpening the larger size detail in your scene. So I would say medium to larger size detail, you should use the clarity slider for that. Here's a fully edited version of this particular image. And here is the image straight out of camera. So here's the fully edited version, and here's the version straight out of camera. So I'm just going to apply a real quick edit. Now, what's interesting about this is, let's say that I want to add clarity to this area right here, because this is the area that I believe I focused on for this particular image, and I really want to enhance this area. So if I don't want to apply clarity to the entire photograph, you can get very localized with this. And I think this is one of the big benefits of using Lightroom, by using the local adjustments inside of Lightroom, I should say, is because you can use sharpening as a means to direct the viewer's attention to certain areas of your scene, because the human eye naturally goes to brighter areas of a photograph and also areas that have the greatest level of detail or the greatest level of sharpness. So you can really direct the viewer's attention to certain areas of your scene by getting localized with where you apply your clarity or your texture or your sharpening in general. So for this situation, if I want to apply clarity to the entire image, you just slide it all the way over. And you see how much brighter the image got? You can really see this if I zoom all the way in here. Not that far, maybe right about there. See, you can really see the luminance increase, and that's what you really want to watch out for. So let's say that I really don't like the way that the clarity slider affects the entire image here, because it's brightening up just a lot of areas of the scene that I don't want to be impacted. So I would come up here to the radial filter, and I would draw a radial filter right around here, something. And I'm just doing this real rough like that. And then I'm going to come down here to clarity and only add that clarity to the area that I want to affect right here. And if I toggle this on and off, that's off, and that's on, off, and on. So you can definitely see how using specific types of sharpening in certain areas of your scene could be highly beneficial as well. And this is a great example of it right here, because I don't really want to apply any kind of sharpening to the water or the leaves in the background. I really want to only sharpen that one specific area in the foreground. So that's definitely another approach. But clarity is great for sharpening the kind of medium to larger size details in your scene. Now, the next way, and this is a way that really isn't commonly associated with sharpening your photograph, but it absolutely does, and it's by using the Dehaze slider. Now, this is a great example right here because this is an incredibly hazy image, but you can see how soft this photograph looks. And if I crank the dehaze up, you'll notice two things. One, it's not near as hazy, but you'll also notice that a lot of that larger size detail is much more refined or much more pronounced now that we slid that dehaze slider up. And I'll do it again here. So this is before and this is after. Before and after. So dehaze is a very simple way to sharpen the largest size detail in your scene, but what you want to be careful for is the dehaze slider adds a lot of contrast to your image, and it also adds a lot of saturation to your photograph. So after you apply dehaze to your image, you want to go back and look at your saturation and go back and look at your contrast, because you might want to adjust it a little bit after you go ahead and apply this technique to it. And then the final approach, and this is kind of similar to the dehaze slider. A lot of times people don't think about this as a means to sharpen your photographs, but it's by using the contrast slider. And if you remember at the beginning of the video, all sharpening is an illusion created by adding contrast to a photograph. Very small levels of contrast to edges of your scene. So it makes sense that the contrast slider or the tone curve would be a great way to sharpen your overall photograph. And here's a good example right here. This is from Yosemite, and it looks like a fairly flat looking image. But if we add a little bit of contrast to it, you can see how all those details become more pronounced now. So this is before, or this is with contrast, and this is without. And you add a little bit, and it really just sharpens a lot of the detail in that scene. But once again, whenever you use contrast, of course, you want to make sure you don't go overboard with it, but you also want to check the saturation level, because adding contrast naturally will saturate your colors. So you might have to go back and do a little bit of adjustment to your colors that way. So those are really the 5 main ways to sharpen an image inside of Lightroom. And I did an entire tutorial series on this. I believe it is 9 teaching videos. It's over an hour and a half worth of content. And I'll put a link below in the description if you want to take a look at that. I also have a promo code, which I'll put along the bottom here, that'll get you 33% off this video tutorial series. So if you're interested in that, the link will be in the description below. So I hope you enjoyed this week's video, and I hope you were able to get some information pertaining to sharpening your landscape photos or different ways to enhance detail in your landscape photos that you can apply to your images at home. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below, and I guarantee I will get back in touch with you. And if you enjoyed this week's video, if you could give it that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. And as always, I really do appreciate you watching this week's video, and I'll see you next week. Bye.